Rome did not collapse in a single night. It did not fall in one dramatic battle beneath burning skies. The greatest empire of the ancient world did not vanish because a single enemy proved stronger. For centuries, Rome dominated continents, commanded unmatched legions, engineered roads and aqueducts that outlived generations, and built a legal system that still shapes modern civilization. It survived civil wars, political conspiracies, economic crises, and relentless invasions. It adapted, expanded, and endured. From the outside, Rome appeared invincible. It was not merely a state, it was an idea of permanence. And yet, it fell. The question has echoed for centuries: who destroyed Rome? Was it the barbarian tribes crossing weakened borders? Was it political instability? Was it economic collapse? Was it moral decline? Historians have debated endlessly, but perhaps the deeper truth lies not in a single cause, but in a confrontation. A confrontation between two forces that lived inside the empire itself. Rome versus Rome. Strength versus stagnation. Discipline versus luxury. Expansion versus overextension. At its height, Rome believed in its own inevitability. It saw itself as eternal. Its citizens grew up under the shadow of imperial greatness. Its armies marched with confidence born from repeated victory. Its rulers governed with the assumption that power, once achieved, would sustain itself. But power carries a paradox. The stronger a system becomes, the harder it is to imagine its limits. Success can breed complacency. Expansion can create fragility. Wealth can weaken discipline. Stability can mask decay. Rome did not wake up one day and decide to collapse. It adjusted slowly. Small compromises accumulated. Political loyalty shifted from republic to emperors. Military service transformed from civic duty into paid profession. Public virtue gradually gave way to spectacle and distraction. None of these changes seemed catastrophic in isolation. Each felt manageable. Each felt temporary. Yet together, they altered the internal structure of the empire. This is the story not of invasion alone, but of internal tension. Not of a single fatal blow, but of a gradual imbalance between power and resilience. Because empires rarely fall at their weakest moment. They fall when they can no longer recognize their own weakening. Rome did not simply face enemies at its borders, it faced erosion within its foundations. To understand the fall of Rome is not merely to study ancient history. It is to examine a timeless pattern. What happens when expansion outpaces stability? What happens when comfort replaces discipline? What happens when institutions grow larger than the values that once sustained them? Rome's collapse forces us to confront a deeper question: can a superpower destroy itself without realizing it? This is not just a tale of barbarian invasions or political assassinations. It is a confrontation between greatness and decay. Between the visible strength of an empire and the invisible weaknesses accumulating beneath it. And perhaps the most unsettling possibility is this: Rome was not defeated by its enemies alone. It was undone by the slow conflict between its own power and its own transformation. At the heart of Rome's rise stood one defining force: conquest. The early Roman Republic was built on disciplined expansion, strategic warfare, and relentless ambition. Roman legions were not merely armies, they were instruments of organization, endurance, and calculated aggression. They moved with precision. They built roads as they marched. They fortified positions with engineering brilliance. Every victory strengthened the Republic's economy, prestige, and influence. Conquest was not chaos. It was systematized expansion. Rome did not grow accidentally. It absorbed territories deliberately. Each annexed region became part of a broader administrative structure. Law followed the sword. Infrastructure followed the law. Trade routes expanded. Taxes flowed toward the center. The Mediterranean slowly transformed into what Romans proudly called Mare Nostrum, our sea. Expansion fed confidence. Confidence fed identity. Rome was not just growing, it was becoming inevitable. But conquest carries a hidden cost. As territories multiplied, so did complexity. Governing distant provinces required bureaucratic expansion. Communication slowed across vast distances. Corruption flourished in regions far from central oversight. Military presence had to be permanent, not temporary. Borders stretched thin across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Defense became as demanding as conquest once was. The energy that once fueled expansion now diverted toward maintenance. The paradox of imperial growth is simple: expansion increases power outward while straining stability inward. Each new border required additional legions. Each additional legion required funding. Each campaign required loyalty and discipline that could not be sustained indefinitely. What began as strategic advantage gradually transformed into logistical burden. Over time, Rome's victories became obligations. Provinces needed protection from rebellion and invasion. Local unrest required intervention. Political leaders competed for military glory, sometimes dragging the state into unnecessary conflicts to maintain prestige. Expansion was no longer purely defensive or strategic, it became psychological. Rome had grown accustomed to victory. To stop expanding felt like weakness. And when an empire equates growth with survival, it struggles to recognize limits. Overexpansion also reshaped the Roman army. In earlier centuries, soldiers fought as citizens defending their homeland. Their loyalty was civic and personal. But as campaigns grew distant and continuous, military service evolved. Generals gained personal influence over troops. Allegiance shifted from republic to commander. Civil wars erupted not because Rome was weak, but because it had become too large and too powerful for its own political structure. The very roads that once enabled swift conquest now carried threats across weakened frontiers. The very wealth that poured into Rome fueled luxury and dependency. The very territories that symbolized dominance demanded constant defense. The empire that once thrived on motion became trapped by its own scale. This is the critical tension: conquest created Rome's strength, but overexpansion created Rome's fragility. What once energized the Republic eventually exhausted it. Expansion without recalibration transforms triumph into vulnerability. Power, when stretched too far, becomes weight. Rome did not collapse simply because enemies attacked. It struggled because its reach exceeded its capacity for sustainable cohesion. The drive to conquer had built an empire unmatched in scale. But the inability to define limits left that empire structurally strained. In the end, the spirit of conquest that once made Rome unstoppable became part of the mechanism that made it unstable. Growth without balance is not resilience. It is acceleration toward strain. In its earliest centuries, Rome was not wealthy. It was not adorned in marble palaces or flooded with foreign gold. It was defined by discipline. Roman identity was forged in hardship, restraint, and civic responsibility. Citizens were soldiers. Service was duty, not profession. Honor was not displayed in excess but proven through endurance. The Republic valued austerity, order, and sacrifice. Political authority rotated. Power was balanced through institutions. The system rewarded resilience rather than indulgence. Discipline was not merely military, it was cultural. Roman virtues such as gravitas, pietas, and virtus reflected seriousness, loyalty, and courage. Public life demanded accountability. Personal ambition was restrained by expectation of service. The Republic survived not because it was rich, but because it was structured around shared responsibility. Stability emerged from self-control. But success transformed Rome. As conquest expanded territory, wealth poured into the capital. Precious metals, slaves, exotic goods, and tribute from provinces flooded Roman markets. Marble replaced stone. Villas replaced modest homes. Entertainment expanded in scale and spectacle. Luxury, once rare, became normal for the elite. Comfort slowly replaced austerity as the standard of living in the capital. With wealth came a shift in values. Political office increasingly became a path to personal enrichment rather than public service. Competition for power intensified. Patronage networks deepened. Loyalty moved from state to individual benefactors. The republic's moral backbone began to bend under the weight of ambition. The concept of bread and circuses emerged as a stabilizing mechanism. Public entertainment, gladiator games, chariot races, massive spectacles, distracted the population. Grain distributions ensured basic needs were met. Comfort replaced civic engagement. The population became spectators rather than participants. As long as food was available and entertainment continued, unrest remained contained. Comfort alters psychology. When survival is guaranteed and luxury becomes accessible, urgency diminishes. Citizens become less invested in structural integrity and more invested in personal security. Military service becomes less attractive compared to private wealth. The disciplined citizen soldier gradually gives way to professional armies. Civic virtue transitions into consumer expectation. The danger of comfort is not immediate collapse. It is slow erosion. Discipline requires constant renewal. Luxury requires constant supply. Once a society adjusts to high levels of comfort, reducing them becomes politically dangerous. Leaders hesitate to impose austerity. Reform becomes unpopular. Stability becomes tied to maintaining indulgence rather than maintaining strength. At the same time, inequality widens. Elites accumulate enormous wealth while lower classes rely on state distributions. Dependency deepens. Public life shifts from participation to consumption. The Republic's original spirit of shared sacrifice weakens. Rome's external power remained formidable, but internally the culture that once sustained it had shifted. It is not that luxury alone destroys empires. Wealth can strengthen a state if paired with discipline. The problem arises when comfort replaces responsibility. When citizens no longer see themselves as guardians of the system, but as beneficiaries of it. When the expectation becomes receiving rather than sustaining. Rome's transformation from disciplined republic to indulgent imperial capital did not occur overnight. It unfolded across generations. Each generation inherited greater wealth and weaker urgency. The memory of hardship faded. The expectation of permanence grew. And with that expectation came complacency. In the confrontation between discipline and luxury, discipline builds strength slowly and quietly. Luxury consumes it gradually and invisibly. Rome's power did not vanish the moment marble palaces were built. But the psychological shift from restraint to indulgence altered the internal balance of the empire. The tragedy is subtle. The same success that created prosperity undermined the cultural conditions that had made prosperity possible. One of Rome's greatest achievements was not military conquest, but legal order. Roman law became the backbone of the empire. It structured governance, defined citizenship, regulated property, and established procedures that outlived emperors and dynasties. The genius of Rome was not only in its legions but in its ability to transform power into system. Law unified diverse provinces under a shared framework. It created predictability. It reduced chaos. It allowed an empire of immense scale to function with coherence. In the early republic, law was a stabilizing force against personal ambition. Offices were temporary. Power was limited. Institutions checked one another. Even generals, at least in theory, answered to civic authority. The rule of law restrained excess and reinforced collective identity. Citizens believed the system was larger than any individual. Legitimacy rested not only on force, but on procedure. But institutions require integrity to endure. As Rome expanded and wealth accumulated, law increasingly became vulnerable to manipulation. Political competition intensified. Elections grew expensive. Patronage networks deepened. Ambitious leaders discovered that influence could bend legal boundaries. Bribery seeped into administration. Provincial governors exploited distant territories for personal enrichment. Oversight weakened as distance from the capital increased. Corruption rarely begins with dramatic betrayal. It begins with small concessions. A favor granted. A law selectively enforced. An appointment secured through loyalty rather than merit. Each compromise appears manageable in isolation. Yet collectively, they erode trust. When citizens perceive that law is applied unevenly, legitimacy weakens. When rules serve elites rather than the public, cynicism replaces respect. The transition from republic to empire intensified this dynamic. As emperors consolidated authority, institutions became increasingly dependent on personal will. Stability relied on the character of the ruler rather than the resilience of the system. Some emperors governed effectively. Others ruled through paranoia or incompetence. The legal structure remained, but its enforcement fluctuated with personality. Military influence further destabilized legal order. Generals with loyal troops could challenge political authority. Law became negotiable when backed by armed force. Civil wars exposed fragility within institutional design. Power shifted from civic legitimacy to coercive leverage. The empire that once prided itself on law found itself increasingly governed by proximity to force. Corruption has a psychological dimension as well. When individuals observe misconduct at high levels, moral standards adjust downward. If they exploit the system, why shouldn't I, becomes a quiet justification. Corruption spreads not only through policy but through perception. Once trust dissolves, compliance becomes transactional. Law is no longer respected, it is navigated. Importantly, the Roman legal framework did not disappear overnight. It continued to function in many respects. Contracts were enforced. Trade operated. Courts existed. But beneath the surface, credibility weakened. And credibility is the invisible foundation of law. Without trust, even well-designed institutions become brittle. The contrast between strong law and corruption reveals a crucial tension. Law centralizes authority in abstract principle. Corruption personalizes authority around individual gain. When the latter overwhelms the former, institutions hollow from within. Externally, Rome still appeared structured and orderly. Internally, moral cohesion thinned. Empires do not collapse the moment corruption appears. They collapse when corruption becomes normalized and self-sustaining. When legal mechanisms exist but are no longer believed to be impartial. When citizens comply out of necessity rather than conviction. When the rule of law transforms into rule by influence. Rome's tragedy was not that it lacked laws. It was that over time, enforcement weakened, ambition outpaced accountability, and personal power overshadowed institutional restraint. The framework remained, but the spirit eroded. In the confrontation between strong law and corruption, law builds legitimacy slowly. Corruption undermines it quietly. And when legitimacy fades, even powerful empires begin to fracture from within. Rome was not destroyed in a single battle. It was weakened slowly, from within. Discipline faded. Law weakened. Comfort replaced responsibility. And when the final blow came, Rome was already tired. History is not just about the past. It is about patterns. If you want to explore how empires rise, decay, and repeat the same mistakes, subscribe to the channel. Because the fall of Rome is not just history. It is a warning.